just a single word. That was the entirety of the reaction an insider offered to detectives upon reviewing the newly salvaged security feeds from the Guthrie residence. They did not call it suspicious, groundbreaking, or even helpful. They simply called it peculiar. For 44 agonizing days, a desperate hunt has unfolded for an 84-year-old matriarch who evaporated from her Catalina Foothills estate in Tucson, Arizona, under the cover of darkness on February 1, 2026. Detectives have guarded their public statements with intense, almost surgical precision. Every single syllable released to the press has been heavily weighed and calibrated. Each breadcrumb of information must survive the rigorous gauntlet of an ongoing federal probe, knowing that a single misplaced phrase could shatter a future conviction before it even begins. Such a slip could inadvertently alert the perpetrator or unravel a delicate web of forensic proof that took months of painstaking labor to weave together. This suffocating veil of secrecy is precisely why that lone, isolated descriptor leaked to a single media outlet carried such an incredible, chilling weight. Peculiar. Within the meticulous theater of criminal profiling and forensics, vocabulary is never accidental. It is absolute. If an informant intimately connected to an open federal inquiry characterizes salvaged video evidence in such a bizarrely ambiguous way, they are definitely not tossing around colloquialisms for dramatic effect. They are signaling a profound anomaly, a jagged puzzle piece that fundamentally fractures the established theories surrounding the crime. It is an enigma that the agents scrutinizing the monitors are still completely unable to decipher, and undoubtedly forbidden from sharing with the public. We are plunging into the dark implications of that specific characterization, decoding the secrets hidden within those newly unearthed visual files, exploring the terrifying void of what was missing, and analyzing how the mechanical blindness of those lenses during the most crucial hours might finally unmask the phantom who stole Nancy Guthrie. The paradox originates with a trio of security lenses, all functioning flawlessly right up until the exact moment their vigilance was required. The victim relied on a cardiac implant synchronized to a smartphone application for constant monitoring. She also depended on audio enhancers to perceive the world, though she routinely took them out before surrendering to sleep. Stripped of that technology, she was plunged into absolute, vulnerable silence. Her final confirmed sighting occurred on the evening of January 31st, following a warm family gathering at the nearby residence of her daughter, Annie. A relative safely chauffeured her back to her quiet property, with the heavy garage bay ceiling shut at exactly 9:50 in the evening. Then, under the cover of darkness at 1:47 in the morning, the digital eye guarding her primary entryway was deliberately blinded. By 2:28 in the morning, the lifeline between her chest and the bedside monitor was suddenly severed. A mere 8 minutes later, at 2:36 in the morning, a distant neighborhood lens documented a solitary vehicle gliding through the shadows 2.5 miles away. The morning light would eventually expose a grim, crimson trail smears of her own blood, staining the entryway stones, the main door, and the concrete path outside. Federal operatives partnered with tech giants from Google, spending 10 grueling days exhuming buried visual fragments from the deepest, hidden layers of server architectures. What emerged from that digital grave was chilling. A faceless intruder standing at the threshold. The suspect appeared male, roughly 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches in height, sporting a medium frame draped entirely in midnight-hued garments, a complete facial shroud, and dark synthetic gloves. He carried a 25-liter Ozark Trail rucksack, a commercial item native exclusively to Walmart shelves. More menacingly, a firearm rig hung from his right hip, while his dominant wrist briefly flashed across the lens as he reached out to neutralize the recording. Yet, in that split-second gesture, he inadvertently offered a clue that ink specialists and behavioral analysts have relentlessly dissected ever since. A dark stain creeping aggressively toward his lower arm. For a phantom who meticulously engineered every aspect of his disguise to remain a ghost, this single, careless blemish might ultimately serve as the fatal flaw that unravels his entire existence. However, before we dissect the psychology of that ink, we must pivot back to the recently decrypted files to truly grasp why an insider chose such a hauntingly vague term to encapsulate the discovery. Major network journalists at ABC verified this digital exhumation through highly placed contacts tethered to the inner workings of the case. Shortly after, a separate cohort of reporters from Fox corroborated the breakthrough via their own autonomous channels. Following the leaks, the Pima County Sheriff Precinct released a heavily sanitized bulletin, merely conceding that detectives were actively processing visual and physical evidence, mentioning ongoing laboratory assessments but completely walling off any substantive revelations regarding the exact nature or contents of their findings. The recovered cash revealed something deeply unsettling. In the mundane week preceding the kidnapping, the calm before the storm of February 1st, these motion-triggered sensors documented multiple individuals. Strangers were seen lingering within the supposedly private confines of the rear and lateral boundaries of the estate. Detectives possessed pristine visual confirmation of these trespassers wandering the grounds. Following the woman's vanishing, the very same digital archives clearly depicted uniformed personnel sweeping the poolside perimeter, a somber visual record of the immediate, chaotic fallout. But the terror truly lies in the gap. During the exact, horrifying window of the crime, specifically those crucial hours between 1:47 and 2:36 in the morning, the precise span when a life was violently upended, those mechanical watchmen went completely, inexplicably dark. They caught no shadowy silhouette, no rustling brush, no fleeting ghost retreating through the acreage. Absolute emptiness. The exact optical systems that had so diligently tracked every stray movement in the preceding days suffered an impossible bout of blindness precisely when Nancy Guthrie was being ripped from her sanctuary. Authorities have stubbornly refused to draw any premature conclusions about this technological blackout, maintaining a suffocating silence on the matter. Yet, that one insider whispering to the press branded this very void with a single, haunting syllable: peculiar. Absorb the weight of that for a second. The equipment was fully operational. They had been actively tripping and logging footage flawlessly in the lead-up to the nightmare. During any other average evening, whether it was a roaming coyote, a sudden gust rattling the arid flora, or a neighbor straying too close, the digital guards performed their duties without fail. However, on the singular, fateful night when a frail 84-year-old was dragged from her sleeping quarters, forced through her own threshold, and swallowed by the vast, unforgiving Sonoran darkness, the lenses surveying the rear gardens, the side pathways, and the water features registered absolutely zero disturbance. Not a single pixel of motion, no phantom shapes, no tripped alarms. Only an impossible, chilling blankness. Before we delve deeper into the chilling void left by this absence, ask yourself a question. Do you value hard, verifiable evidence over mere whispers and theories? Make sure to subscribe right now and turn on those notifications. Our mission is to relentlessly track the facts, no matter how dark or twisted the path becomes. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon. There are exactly 3 sinister possibilities that could explain why those lenses captured absolutely nothing on the night she was taken. The first theory is the most straightforward, and perhaps the least terrifying of them all. The phantom who orchestrated this simply never approached from the rear of the estate. He marched directly to the front step. With cold calculation, he neutralized the main doorbell surveillance and breached the house right through the primary entrance. The sensors facing the yard remained completely dormant for one simple reason: the yard was totally undisturbed. In this scenario, the blank screens aren't a profound mystery. They merely reflect the intruder's actual, unhidden path, confirming his brazen choice to walk right through the front door. But the second possibility is far more complex. Those lenses were blinded by the exact same technological interference that multiple neighbors reported suffering from on that very same evening. Numerous inhabitants of the affluent Catalina Foothills community went on record, confirming a disturbing detail to the authorities. They stated that their own security systems displayed an offline status, utterly failing to capture a single frame during the precise window of the kidnapping. A man living directly adjacent to the rear of Nancy Guthrie's estate corroborated this chilling fact to News Nation correspondent Brian Enton. He revealed that his dual surveillance lenses, specifically the ones pointed directly toward the border of Nancy's property, went completely dark. They inexplicably shut down during that critical time frame, an anomaly that had never occurred before. Even more unsettling, his dog awoke at that exact moment, pacing to the door to stare intensely toward Nancy's home. If a rogue disruption device was indeed deployed in that quiet neighborhood under the cover of darkness, a piece of technology potent enough to choke wireless internet frequencies within a radius of 30 to 100 feet, it could easily have neutralized the rear surveillance at Nancy's home, precisely mirroring the electronic blackout that plagued the devices next door. Then there is the third scenario, the one detectives refuse to speak about publicly, and the one that truly embodies the word unnatural. Those lenses absolutely should have recorded something, yet they offered nothing but blackness. Make no mistake, a presence moved through that backyard under the moonlight. The angles were perfectly set. The motion trackers were fully operational. And yet, whatever nightmare unfolded, whichever way the predator stalked, regardless of his approach, whether he slinked out from the desolate desert behind the house and crept across the lawn before advancing to the front, the system just never caught a glimpse. If we rule out the use of a digital jammer, this blind spot implies something infinitely more calculated and terrifying. It points to a phantom who knew the precise location of every single lens on that property, an intruder who memorized their visual range, their blind spots, and the exact threshold that would trigger an alert. Someone who danced through the shadows, meticulously avoiding every invisible tripwire. That level of precision does not belong to a random drifter. It is the chilling signature of someone who had walked those grounds before, a person intimately familiar with the layout of every hidden corner of her estate. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer went on the record with Newsweek, boldly stating that it makes absolutely no sense to view this as anything other than a highly targeted strike. The shadowy figure marching toward the entrance, head bowed to conceal his features, makes an immediate, confident beeline straight for the camera. He possessed exact knowledge of its placement. And if he was that acutely aware of the front surveillance, what does the eerie silence of the backyard lenses reveal about the other secrets he held? Enter Paul Powers, the founder and chief executive officer of FISNA, an artificial intelligence-driven search and analytics firm. He publicly broke down the sinister digital mechanics during a detailed technical analysis for News Nation. Wireless network jammers, he detailed, generally cast a net spanning 30 to 100 feet, operating by viciously severing the communication between a smart device and its central router. They do not kill the actual internet connection. Instead, if a camera relied on a wireless link and a jammer infiltrated its airspace, that specific camera would be violently choked off from its network hub. Conversely, if the system was hardwired via an Ethernet cable, it would remain securely tethered to the web, entirely immune to the attack. The device acts as an invisible wall against wireless waves, leaving the foundational broadband service completely untouched. This highly specific technical distinction is a crucial forensic key. If cyber investigators pull the router logs from Nancy Guthrie's residence and discover that the broadband connection stayed alive, while simultaneously noting that targeted wireless endpoints dropped off the grid during that fateful hour, that digital footprint would perfectly match the signature of a weaponized signal jammer rather than a coincidental neighborhood blackout or a standard power failure. Powers brought up another haunting technicality. An attacker can deploy a jammer, yet still fail to prevent some surveillance from reaching the cloud. If the visual data is snapped and transmitted in the fleeting milliseconds before the digital static hits, the file can securely lock into a remote server just before the invisible cord is cut. This precise vulnerability might hold the answer to why the main entryway camera, which was brutally dismantled by hand rather than suffocated by a digital block, managed to capture any haunting visuals in the first place. The digital ghosts of his previous scouting trip and the terrifying clips from the night of the kidnapping were ultimately pulled from the internal flash memory chips embedded deep within the doorbell. They were not retrieved from remote servers, but rather salvaged through a grueling forensic deep dive that demanded 10 exhaustive days of collaboration alongside top engineers from Google. Yet, this technological marvel fails to explain the darkest question of all: why the rear surveillance units, which had been operating flawlessly, saw absolutely nothing on the only night that mattered. Brian Entin floated a deeply unsettling hypothesis in his recent coverage, one that demands our utmost attention. If the predator truly slipped onto the grounds from the sprawling, desolate desert behind her home, navigating the barren, wide-open expanse pressing against the rear boundaries of the Catalina Foothills estates, A predator armed with a signal-blocking device during his stealthy approach could alter everything. The sheer radius of that interference tech might have effortlessly blinded the digital eyes of adjacent residences well before the Phantom ever set foot on Nancy's land. That chilling technological blackout suffered by the next-door residents might not have been a simultaneous event, triggered while the intruder loomed on Nancy's porch. Instead, the electronic darkness likely swallowed those feeds much earlier, at the exact moment the shadow crept across the arid wasteland toward her rear perimeter. Should this terrifying sequence prove accurate, it entirely shatters our understanding of the abduction's timeline. This was not a predator who casually strolled to the main entrance before neutralizing the security systems. Rather, he likely murdered the entire block's digital vigilance methodically, cloaked by the shadows of a rear entry, slipping silently through the backyard defenses without waking a single motion sensor, only to finally materialize at the front threshold. There, he was forced into a physical confrontation with the entryway lens, simply because his portable interference tech lacked the sheer range to cast a blindfold over the front yard from his origin point in the rear. Former federal behavioral analyst Jim Clemente pointed out during a recent media segment that the exact moment the intruder snatched local foliage to blind the entryway lens, he inadvertently exposed a massive flaw in his grim blueprint. By retreating from the alcove and stepping back into the night purely to rip a branch from a nearby bush, this frantic, unscripted maneuver accidentally flashed what Clemente firmly believes is a permanent ink marking etched onto the inner sweep of his right arm. The profiler further observed that resorting to a makeshift handful of yard debris screams of a predator utterly blindsided by the presence of that specific security device. Had he meticulously mapped out the electronic defenses of the primary entrance, he would have concealed a specialized tool on his person, rather than desperately scavenging the landscaping in real time. Through the chilling lens of criminal psychology, this disjointed behavior paints the portrait of a severely fractured methodology. He was calculating enough to execute a lightless wilderness infiltration. He possessed the terrifying foresight to arm himself with signal-killing technology. He displayed the dark patience required for extensive physical scouting to memorize the estate's blueprint, yet remained staggeringly unequipped for the painfully common hurdle of a smart door mechanism looming right in front of him. If the ultimate sinister objective was a surgical strike, breaching the threshold and evaporating into the night in mere seconds, then he catastrophically bungled the execution, as Clemente emphasized in a secondary public assessment. This glaring tactical failure whispers of a far darker truth. His primary ambition might have been entirely different, morphing that agonizingly prolonged duration inside the residence into either a morbid afterthought or the chaotic fallout of a spiraling scheme. 41 suffocating minutes trapped behind locked doors with an intruder who oscillated between terrifying precision and frantic improvisation, completely evading rear surveillance that failed to record a single digital heartbeat of his approach. It is exactly this haunting paradox that has relentlessly consumed the minds of homicide detectives and forensic technologists ever since the chilling porch video was unleashed on the world on February 10th. As the weeks have slowly bled away, the collective dissection of this digital ghost has sharpened into terrifying, microscopic focus. Buried within those grainy frames, right as the predator thrusts his hand upward to smother the electronic eye, the dark fabric of his sleeve slides back, offering a rare betrayal of his identity. Etched onto the vulnerable, exposed flesh of the lower inner arm, the very plane laid bare when the limb violently stretches forward, sits an unmistakable, shadowy blemish. Isolated still frames suggest this dark stain bleeds aggressively downward toward the base of the palm, while in other fleeting moments, the harsh porch glare and distorted angles fiercely guard its true shape. Yet, a chorus of independent specialists has painstakingly dissected the anomaly, and their isolated inquiries have ultimately merged into a chilling, unified consensus. Former federal supervisory investigator Jim Clemente became the pioneering voice to boldly drag this theory into the public spotlight. Speaking candidly to national press, he declared his unshakable conviction that a permanent branding haunts the lower expanse of the assailant's right arm. In the grim mathematics of a manhunt, he elaborated, such a glaring anatomical beacon serves as an ultimate sorting mechanism, violently validating or permanently shredding suspect profiles. This is the exact breed of undeniable biometric signature, a permanent scar that, the second it crosses the eyes of a former associate, triggers an inescapable and fatal flash of recognition. The immense, terrifying power of that recognition stems entirely from the brazen audacity of its geographical placement on the human body. Individuals desperately clinging to conventional society, requiring a pristine, corporate facade, strategically bury their needlework high up the forearm, safely entombed beneath starched cuffs and heavy timepieces. Conversely, desecrating the lower extremity, that transitional zone where flesh remains naked regardless of wardrobe, screams of a fiercely intentional defiance or the hallmark of a life lived far beyond the suffocating reach of polite society's consequences. Credentialed forensic authority Jeffrey Gentry publicly dissected the psychological weight of this specific anatomical canvas during a widely broadcast true crime deep dive. He noted with grim certainty that the moment investigators encounter permanent art creeping dangerously close to the lower extremities, specifically sullying the hands and lower joints, the psychological profile violently narrows toward a very specific breed of predator. These are the indelible stamps frequently forged behind cold steel penitentiary bars or the blood oath insignias proudly flaunted by organized syndicates. Gentry further emphasized that the murky stain refuses to respect the natural boundary of the joint. Instead, it bleeds aggressively downward, an aesthetic deeply consistent with a sprawling, chaotic piece that eventually swallows the entire back of the hand. A seasoned, street-level veteran of the ink world, known simply as Darren the Dude Rosa, wielding 3 decades of mastery behind the needle at his renowned New York City parlor, delivered the most piercing and microscopic dissection of this visual anomaly to date. Addressing the public via a syndicated investigative show, the master artist confidently declared the Phantom's branding to be a classic, textbook example of monochromatic shading. This represents a highly specialized aesthetic discipline, one that violently rejects vibrant pigments in favor of unforgiving black contours bleeding into ghostly, washed-out shadows. He chillingly noted that this particular visual dialect heavily saturates the sun-scorched landscapes of the American Southwest, acting as the undisputed native tongue of the region's most hardened penitentiaries and violent street factions. But the artisan dug far deeper into the psychology of the ink. He insisted that the tiny, blurred fragment caught on camera is undoubtedly not a solitary marking, but merely the jagged tail end of a massive, sweeping tapestry. If this singular, dark smudge is the only secret we are permitted to witness, it is almost undeniably the ragged edge of a much darker, larger story permanently carved into his skin. A massive ink pattern consumes his entire arm, he disclosed to national media. That dark artwork likely bleeds directly onto his hands. Since a thick balaclava completely swallows the assailant's neck, Rosa highlighted a crucial observation carrying immense forensic gravity. His skin likely bears permanent ink across the throat, or perhaps etched beneath the eye. Consider the sheer magnitude of this detail. We are not tracking a phantom with a tiny, easily concealed emblem. Drawing from grim forensic consensus, this predator is extensively pigmented, saturating his arms and creeping aggressively toward his visage. Among the public, an extensively inked individual stands out like a blazing beacon. This aesthetic serves as the violent visual language of southwestern street cartels and hardened penitentiary yards. These shadowy motifs are instantly recognizable to anyone navigating that brutal underworld. The weeping saints, delicate roses, and memorial tributes are quintessential hallmarks, visual signatures, screaming with meaning to those inside locked communities. Deep within Tucson's sprawling grid, someone intimately knows the exact pattern scarring that man's wrist. They stared at those precise hands and gazed upon the naked throat hidden beneath the dark mask at Nancy Guthrie's doorstep. During a chilling psychological breakdown of the case, a former behavioral profiler delivered an insight demanding absolute attention. Estimating the predator in his 30s or 40s, the profiler noted this amateur inevitably radiated erratic conduct his inner circle could easily perceive. The expert emphasized that the perpetrator's closest confidants witnessed a disturbing evolution in his demeanor before and after the horror. Once the tapes aired, sheer paranoia likely drove him to alter his physical look or abandon his vehicle. He might have temporarily fled the jurisdiction, yet his dermal ink remains permanent. Those violent hands cannot be erased. The individuals sharing his daily reality have watched those very same hands move for years. As the manhunt intensified, Sheriff Chris Nanos confronted a haunting theory. The obscured figure caught on camera might possess a distinct ring. "I am staring at the exact same chilling still frame," Nanos admitted grimly. "And I see it. I am handing this visual to my forensic unit. They will tear the image apart, pixel by pixel. For a phantom who meticulously scrubbed away physical evidence, leaving jewelry exposed is a catastrophic mistake. It glimmers faintly in the cold glare of the night vision lens. The band holds a unique shape, perhaps echoing a graduation, reflecting religious devotion, or symbolizing blood allegiance to a syndicate. Every single possibility acts as a psychological filter, rapidly draining the vast ocean of potential culprits. Paired with the extensive ink, his silhouette sharpens into a terrifying portrait. A male, standing roughly 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches, possessing an ordinary build. His flesh is saturated in stark shades of black and gray. This aesthetic perfectly mirrors the grim artistry of southwestern penitentiary yards, boasting designs bleeding down the right wrist, sprawling upward toward his throat. Coupled with the metallic gleam of a band on either hand, the shadow standing at that door is no longer a faceless ghost. This is a living entity carrying a documented physical footprint, one a spouse or coworker stares at during every routine interaction. During a chilling nationwide broadcast, a former supervisory special agent cut straight to the bone. The sole keepers of this dark secret are the monsters who orchestrated it. Take a hard look at the sinister collection of details. The glinting metal, prison ink, tactical backpack, and concealed holster converging onto a single human frame. Somewhere in the unforgiving heat of Tucson, a witness has looked upon that exact, terrifying constellation of items. Detectives cast a massive digital net, pleading with residents to surrender any security recordings dating back to January 1st, 30 days before the nightmare unfolded. Buried within that dragnet was a specific temporal target. Authorities desperately needed the community to scrub their drives for January 11th, zeroing in between 9 at night and midnight. A longtime friend residing just houses away confided to an investigative correspondent that near the 11th of January, she spotted a deeply unsettling figure drifting toward the residence. Peering through her bedroom glass as she prepared for the daylight hours, the neighbor silently tracked his progression. She chillingly recalled his facial features being completely swallowed by shadows and heavy fabric. Dressed in casual street apparel rather than athletic gear, with a heavy baseball cap dragged low, the stranger slouched forward, moving with an eerie, calculating slowness. He was an absolute anomaly in that quiet suburb, pacing entirely too sluggishly for a jogger, while intensely memorizing the geography of the street where Nancy resided. The sight was jarring enough that she immediately brought the haunting anomaly to her husband's attention. Since that cold dawn, she sat down with federal agents repeatedly, confirming the Bureau is obsessively focusing its lens on the 11th of January. Numerous residents along the block echoed this disturbing pattern, revealing that when detectives knocked, the questioning relentlessly circled back to that singular day. Did you witness anything unusual on January 11th? Do your cameras hold ghosts from January 11th? These are certainly not the idle queries of a standard sweep. This represents a surgical probe into a moment authorities are convinced laid the bloody groundwork for the horrors of February 1st. Corroborating whispers of a preliminary scouting mission. Through statements issued to major national broadcasting networks, insiders established a terrifying new timeline. Authorities placed the stalker upon Nancy's very porch long before she vanished, caught in a freeze frame, notably missing the tactical bag he would later haul into the darkness on the 1st of February. Assuming that initial approach occurred on January 11th, the perpetrator spent a chilling 21 days purely on surveillance. That is 3 entire weeks of shadowy preparation, a dark window between his very first knock on her door and his eventual return, armed with a sinister agenda and that now infamous backpack. 21 days provides ample opportunity to watch from the shadows, mapping out the quiet rhythms of a victim's daily life. It is enough time to pinpoint the exact hours when the street falls dead silent and the residence stands completely unguarded, as well as to procure the necessary tools of the trade, including that specific bag. It allowed him to secure the firearm, the specialized holster, and potentially even a signal jamming device. carefully locking every piece of his dark puzzle into place. According to former Federal Bureau of Investigation Supervisory Special Agent Jason Pack, that preliminary scouting trip drastically alters the entire lens through which law enforcement and prosecutors view this crime. It demonstrates a chilling level of criminal sophistication. This was not an impulsive act, but the signature of a predator who methodically weighed his options long before striking a detail of immense consequence. In the eyes of the law, such undeniable proof of calculation and deep premeditation pushes the severity of the charges into a far darker, more punitive territory. Pack noted a distinct psychological irony. The perpetrator likely believed he was executing a flawless, invisible operation. Yet, getting caught on surveillance video on 2 separate occasions while actively attempting to hide his identity reveals a fatal flaw in his methodology, an observation that grows truer with every new development in this unfolding mystery. During his initial scouting mission, the intruder strolled right into the frame of a security lens, completely blind to the fact that he was being watched. When he finally returned to execute the kidnapping, he was captured once more, though this time he made desperate, clumsy attempts to obscure the digital witness. Detectives have since analyzed the surveillance feeds, monitoring the rear of the residence, and inside sources have started to whisper about what the footage actually contains. Or, more chillingly, investigators were struck by the complete absence of anything unusual. Despite the intruder's desperate attempts at a flawless, invisible approach, his phantom-like caution was ultimately insufficient. Authorities have heavily refreshed the official wanted bulletin, cementing the video clips of the phantom figure, a detailed breakdown of his pack, and a comprehensive physical profile of the monster they are hunting. The official alert paints a heartbreaking picture of Nancy Guthrie, an extraordinarily vulnerable older woman who struggles significantly with her mobility. She relies on an implanted cardiac device and requires strict, daily medicinal regimens just to keep her heart beating safely. The Bureau desperately urges anyone harboring clues about the man's identity to dial 1-800-CALL-FBI. The very fact that federal agents decided to overhaul this public notice deep into the 7th week of the probe is a major psychological play. Refusing to let the trail go cold or the poster gather dust sends a loud, undeniable message to the public. It perfectly mirrors the internal mindset of the detectives working the case. The task force firmly believes that unmasking this predator will ultimately come down to a sharp-eyed citizen recognizing him, rather than waiting for a slow, miraculous breakthrough from a forensics laboratory. They possess the shadowy contours of a visage hidden just beneath a disguise. They have documented ink etched into his wrist, alongside the specific retail origins of his big-box store knapsack. Investigators have matched his weapons sheath to a precise commercial model and noted a distinct piece of jewelry resting on his finger. They remain utterly convinced that the key to unlocking his identity lies with a civilian currently walking the sun-baked streets of Tucson, or perhaps someone in an adjacent town, an individual deeply embedded in the gritty subcultures of monochromatic street ink, underground syndicate affiliations, and the harsh realities of the southwestern desert landscape. Law enforcement is no longer holding their breath for a miraculous tip-off regarding the victim's exact whereabouts. Instead, they are biding their time until the right person stares at the digitized ink on that recorded wrist and feels a sudden, chilling spark of recognition. Meanwhile, a convoluted cocktail of biological evidence was carefully extracted from the interior of the crime scene. Authorities strongly suspect this biological material holds the genetic blueprint of the attacker, a detail openly corroborated by Sheriff Nanos as the sample undergoes rigorous analysis at an independent facility down in Florida. Forensics experts classify the swab as heavily mingled, indicating a tangled web of cellular matter left behind by multiple different people. Untangling this microscopic knot to map out a single, clear genetic identity is an agonizingly slow and meticulous endeavor. Should the biological overlap prove too convoluted, involving the cellular traces of 3 or more distinct contributors, separating the genetic strands becomes an agonizingly difficult puzzle, often failing to yield a signature pure enough for the National Federal Registry. However, falling short of the pristine standards required for a national system upload does not mean the genetic ghost is entirely without value to detectives. Ex-federal investigator Jennifer Coffindaffer has openly stated that even a severely degraded or fragmented biological map holds immense investigative power. While it might be automatically rejected by the centralized algorithms, a partial read provides more than enough data to directly match against a specific named target. Once detectives inevitably shrink their list of potential predators, utilizing the physical clues, the distinctive wrist ink, the subtle flash of the jewelry, the retail receipts for that specific canvas bag, or the tedious sweeps of local firearms dealers that fragmented genetic shadow will become the ultimate lie detector, definitively locking a suspect in or ruling them out entirely. The biological narrative shifts entirely when examining the discarded handwear. Scientists managed to pull a distinct male cellular signature from a glove found discarded roughly 2 miles away from the initial abduction zone. Chillingly, the recovered garment bears a striking, undeniable resemblance to the tactical protection worn by the Phantom captured on the front porch camera. That specific genetic sequence was successfully fed into the national system, a massive digital vault housing upwards of 19 million convicted offender profiles. The result? Absolute silence. The system kicked back 0 hits, proving that whoever slipped their hand into that fabric does not currently haunt the federal archives. This presents a terrifying dichotomy. The predator is either a ghost who has completely evaded law enforcement, or his past transgressions simply never warranted a cheek swab. This is where the groundbreaking science of investigative genetic genealogy steps into the void, a highly specialized technique that operates entirely outside the rigid confines of traditional police databases. The methodology relies entirely on taking the perpetrator's biological ghost and running it through massive, consumer-facing ancestry platforms. Analysts then hunt through the digital family trees, searching for distant biological echoes among everyday people who unknowingly handed over the key to a monster's identity while simply trying to discover their own heritage. A single genetic fragment linking to a distant cousin, even 2 or 3 branches removed, is the only thread forensic genealogists need to map out an entire bloodline. They meticulously trace these ancestral roots, winding forward and backward across decades, hunting for the precise intersection of age, gender, and geography that forms a ghost's shadow. It was this exact scientific alchemy that finally unmasked the Golden State Killer after 4 decades of terrifying silence. The very same digital dragnet that inextricably tied Brian Kohberger to the slaughter in Idaho in a matter of mere weeks. And it is the relentless methodology responsible for breathing life back into cold files left abandoned since the 1970s. By mid-February, federal authorities acknowledged that genetic material pulled from that discarded glove was slated for database upload, awaiting only the final bureaucratic hurdle of quality assurance. Authorities have remained completely silent on whether that upload is finished or if any familial echoes have pinged the system. But the underlying science never sleeps. Behind closed doors in a Florida testing facility, within the sprawling architecture of genetic ancestry webs, and deep inside the digital footprints stripped from Nancy's personal internet router, the investigation grinds forward. It beats steadily within the localized mobile network data currently being dissected by the Bureau's Elite Cellular Analysis Survey Unit. The hunt pulses through retail transaction histories, painstakingly isolating the purchase of that specific backpack, while firearms registries are scoured to find the exact origin of a matching holster. Every single one of these forensic gears is turning in unison, a synchronized machine narrowing its sights on one solitary figure. The Phantom sporting a distinct mark inked into his right wrist, a predator who stepped into the frame on 2 separate occasions, fully convinced the lenses were blind. Should the perpetrator have emerged from the desolate expanse behind Nancy's residence, creeping across the rugged, untamed desert that backs up against the Catalina Foothills, he would have been forced to navigate the entire rear perimeter of her land before ever making it to the side alleys or the front entrance. Under any ordinary circumstances, the surveillance lenses actively guarding the swimming pool, the rear lawns, and the side passages would have caught this intrusion and immediately begun recording. Yet, they remained dark. In the days leading up to the nightmare, those exact same devices had functioned flawlessly. They routinely captured anyone wandering the grounds, quietly documenting every mundane chore or yard worker moving through the property. Right up until the 1st of February, they even caught the arrival of the police officers who responded to Nancy's vanishing. But during the actual hours of her abduction, the system captured absolute nothingness. Detectives are currently weighing 3 chilling possibilities. The first being the deployment of a wireless jamming device to blind the system during his advance. The second is a meticulously choreographed path through the yard, perfectly dodging the motion sensors of feet demanding intimate, prior surveillance of the property's blind spots. The third option is a deeply unsettling anomaly in the video files, something forensic analysts will only publicly characterize as decidedly peculiar, refusing to elaborate. It is this mysterious third theory that forces our attention back to a crucial, terrifying detail: the preliminary scouting trip. Sometime in January, a stranger materialized on Nancy Guthrie's front stoop, lingered on the threshold, stared directly into the lens, and then vanished. 3 weeks later, he returned. That gave him 21 days to dissect the vulnerabilities of her home from every conceivable vantage point. Whether lurking on the public street, trespassing on adjacent lots, or finding a hidden perch in the brush, he was hunting for the exact layout of her electronic defenses. He mapped out their motion radii, calculated their blind angles, and noted how they were positioned against the dark approach from the desert behind the house. 21 days is an eternity to study a security setup, more than enough time to memorize the precise path a ghost would need to walk. It has now been 44 days since the garage mechanism shut at 9:50 in the evening, sealing Nancy Guthrie inside her house forever. 44 days since her exterior lenses last observed a normal reality. 44 agonizing days since an unknown variable compromised those visual safeguards on the single most devastating night of her life. A variable that an insider, intimately familiar with the recently salvaged digital artifacts, summarized using only one haunting adjective: peculiar. But that subtle descriptor does not close the book. Rather, it cracks open a deeply disturbing new angle of inquiry. It is a question federal authorities refuse to clarify on the record, and one the Pima County Sheriff's deputies deliberately avoid during their rare media briefings. In fact, their final official update to the press occurred a staggering 37 days before these details came to light. Furthermore, the massive volume of physical and digital clues churning through crime labs, ancestry algorithms, and mobile signal matrices has yet to supply a definitive answer. Yet the invisible net is tightening. The description of that ink on the suspect's right arm is currently pinging across federal criminal networks. Detectives are actively mining big-box retail receipts to track the bag, while the recovered firearm sheath is being rigorously vetted against regional weapons purchases. Meanwhile, pleas for footage from January 11th are paying off as locals dig deep into their personal cloud backups. They are uncovering chilling details hiding in plain sight. One resident recalled spotting a solitary figure marching purposefully toward Nancy's residence on that very January afternoon. His face was obscured by a low-slung cap, his head bowed as he crept along, his gaze locked intensely on the layout of her particular block. She relayed this dread to her husband, then officially to federal agents, and out there in the dark, the man she watched undoubtedly knows he was seen. The security feeds captured absolute blackness on the night of the abduction, yet detectives discovered something hidden within that digital void, an anomaly described by insiders as highly unusual. And in a massive manhunt where every syllable released to the media is weaponized, sanitized, and strategically calculated, the word unusual is never a slip of the tongue. It is a deliberate, psychological string being violently yanked by authorities. When a string like that is pulled by the infinite reach of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, armed with the forensic capabilities of 2026, it is only a matter of time before the monster at the other end is unraveled. Forward any vital information directly to tips.fbi. A staggering bounty of $1.2 million now hangs over this mystery, $1 million from the Guthries, $100,000 federally. Multiple retired profilers publicly assert this was no solitary operation. In the grim mathematics of conspiracy, the first to shatter silence earns immunity. Whoever hesitates faces the crushing severity of the law. Retired federal investigator Maureen O'Connell stated publicly, convinced of a collaborative plot, she notes these suspects are currently trapped in a suffocating psychological pressure cooker. It is a desperate waiting game. $1.2 million introduces weaponized paranoia, relentlessly fracturing the fragile loyalty between co-conspirators bound by an irreversible, dark act. Secure your subscription here as we track every cold twist of this investigation. Activate alerts. Every legitimate breakthrough will be dissected using strictly vetted documents and irrefutable facts alone. Leave your theories below. What unsettling anomaly do you suspect surveillance lenses recorded that insiders deemed bizarre? This impenetrable mystery is collapsing. Distinct ink was immortalized on video, while crucial physical traces undergo relentless forensic scrutiny. Somewhere, an unidentified figure bearing a specific mark on his right arm watches his time expire. We refuse to simply entertain with grim fables. We relentlessly hunt the cold reality.